Great. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming today for the second day of the workshops. So kicking off today, talking a little bit about kind of classroom to community, a project-based learning approach. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some things that I've done, since 2015 here on our SUNY Oswego campus with one of my health promotion courses, and how I've really gotten the community involved and had the students start thinking about kind of big world problems and how they're able to problem solve with that, and give you a little bit of background on what project-based learning is and how you can also integrate this into your own classroom. And I am Jessica Harris. I'm a assistant professor in the Department of Health Promotion and Wellness. So what is project-based learning? So it is problem-oriented. So it's really a student-centered learning method, and students are working in groups. They're carrying out different types of projects that they can integrate their own knowledge into. And ultimately what it does and what I love about it is it emphasizes that collaborative inquiry, but also with critical thinking and that real-world problem solving. It's kind of the idea of learning by doing, right? Giving them the opportunity to have ownership and authenticity over what they're doing in the classroom. In my project-based learning, what I do in my classroom is it starts from the first day all the way to the end of the semester. It's built in, it's cumulative. They're working towards this one big implementation they're going to be doing within the community. And it's a way for them to look forward to what they're doing in the course, and everything's kind of connected and it scaffolds as they go through the semester. So some of the steps of project-based learning is really taking the students through kind of a process. And ultimately what's happening when you're doing something with project-based learning is the students have to identify some sort of problem. It can be a global, a world problem. And really what they're doing is they're devising a solution in their groups, a potential solution or pathway on how to kind of achieve a solution to this grand problem. And what they have to do in this process throughout my course and throughout the semester is really design and develop whether it's a prototype or a solution to this grand problem. Now, by doing that, they're refining it, they're coming up with different solutions, they're problem solving, they're critical thinking, they're getting feedback from experts, other instructors, their peers, and it's kind of this iterative process with project-based learning. So the importance of it, why I think people should use it. The research does show with academic achievement that project-based learning leads to better academic outcomes compared to traditional instruction. Additionally, when it comes to critical thinking skills, it improves students' ability to think critically and ask those meaningful questions. And I think with interpersonal competencies, project-based learning kind of enhances that collaboration. It gets peers working together, leadership, teamwork skills, and also builds that communication. And it also is moving away from that traditional passive instruction to more active and collaborative inquiry for students, where we often see that students have a high enjoyment for that, and they're learning and retaining more material in those types of classrooms. Some strategies for effective implementation. So providing structured support, using scaffolding to guide students through the project, encouraging that type of collaboration. So going back to number one with the structured support, my whole class is revolving around project-based learning. So it's very structured in the sense of the assignments are connected to exactly what the final outcome will be for the students. It gives them the time to problem solve. It gives them the time to do marketing, to put things out into the community. So everything's kind of structured in there. And you can have an unstructured or a structured type of, project-based learning. It depends on how you want to implement it and integrate it into your classroom. Mine is just very cumulative. It's the whole course and assignments are related to kind of their final implementation, which I'll get to and show you in a little bit. And encouraging that collaboration. So again, having them in groups and having to foster that teamwork and peer learning. It's very important as the instructor to make sure when we're creating those groups that we are holding students accountable, that there is leadership and teamwork skills and tasks that they have. So everybody is on task, on time and working and participating. And I find this is a higher level course for me. I find that I have most students, if not always, are attending class because they know they need to be there for their group members and what they're doing that day. It's one of the classes that I've had my highest attendance rate in, almost 100% of all students all the time. And that's very successful because they are encouraged to collaborate and they do want to be there for their group members. So I have noticed that change in attendance and participation within this project-based learning course. So authentic context, really pulling in those real world challenges. And this is, I think, what really helps getting students thinking about, critical thinking, but also problem solving of what they can do as students to a huge problem that is, a public health issue, particularly in my course, and how they're going to attack that problem and what are the steps, the barriers, the obstacles, all things that they need to take into consideration in order to make this a successful solution. Um, Also allowing time for reflection, incorporating reflection sessions is kind of a really important task and part of this, really helping students process their learning throughout the semester when I do the project-based learning, and also allowing time for final reflection of their group members and evaluation, but also thinking back on the entire process and how they've reflected on it. There is a final portfolio where they have a final reflection, and I'll talk a little bit about that too and give you some examples. So classroom to community. So I'm going to show you kind of a showcase of what I believe to be a successful project-based learning approach that I used in my health promotion course. I've been doing it for a long time now, since 2015. I've been refining it each year. So I've had a lot of students do some great community implementations, some that are on campus, some are off campus, so internal and external. And I'm going to share those with you. So the course that I teach where I apply the project-based learning is health promotion program planning. So again, this is a semester-long project and students are collaborating specifically in groups. So they're put in groups in the second week of class. They get to know their groups with specific teamwork and collaboration assignments before we get started. And what they're doing is in those groups, ultimately, they're tasked with identifying, designing, and implementing a health promotion program that addresses a real world community issue. Now, the students have to find what that issue is. So they're looking at a specific health issue that's happening in their community. And to do that, part of those assignments have them going out and doing data collection, face-to-face interviews, so quantitative and qualitative data analysis to see, what is the actual problem and how are we going to move forward and provide a solution for this problem. I've had students come up with various solutions, which we'll get to, but some come up with policy, some come up with a health promotion program, newsletters, different types of things, and they get really creative with it, which is the fun part, of this course and the fun part, I think, for the students. So over the course of this semester, students move through those key project-based learning phases that I mentioned previously, and they're completing assignments that kind of mirror this process, but in a professional program planning way in the field of health promotion. So all of the assignments that help them in each of these phases are particular to my fields and my discipline. So needs assessments, logic models, those types of things to help them kind of get to this final solution. So I'm integrating everything from my field into those steps of project-based learning. So it is very applicable for any type of discipline. I'm just sharing particularly how I did it in mine. So it is a very hands-on and immersive experience. And I feel as though it builds, that students' creativity. They're able to really start preparing for future careers right out of this course, which is very important because it also is our prerequisite to our internship course in our major. And it gives them the learning by doing. They're actually taking skills they're learning in class and they're implementing them in the real world community, which I think is very important, especially for who I'm preparing, which is health educators, but for all students in general in all disciplines. It's very important for them to also get that career experience because I'm really preparing them for the specific job skills that employers are looking for in my field. So in implementing this type of project-based learning, is, as a pedagogical approach, it really entails several key processes. So again, going back to those phases of they need to define the problem, and also in defining and identifying that problem, what are the constraints, the obstacles, the challenges with this issue? They need to think critically about that. So there's a lot of steps even outside of the four when you're thinking about how you define a problem and how you generate multiple ideas to solve it. So they're coming up with lots of ideas on how they can approach the issue. And we're talking about big health issues. So a lot of the students have targeted things like mental health. They've targeted obesity, right? These are major public health issues, grand problems in today's society. So they're coming up with different ways and ideas as a group to really try and forge a path to a solution. Then they start to design, prototyping and designing, what is their solution going to do? How is it going to actually change behavior? So with that design and prototyping, there's a lot of theory and model in my discipline involved for them. So they get to kind of test that. And finally, the testing of that is developing the solution, which is the live or authentic setting where they are providing participants with that solution. So how I did this with project-based learning was I really structured my class in a way where the students have to identify the problem. So I had specific course assignments that were linked to this PBL process. So for instance, they had a pre-planning and needs assessment assignment. The needs assessment really is something that's particular to many disciplines, but in health promotion as well, where they had to identify what the need actually was. What is the actual problem in the specific community they wanted to prioritize? A lot of students chose college students because it's a convenient sample for them. And in doing so, they had to collect data. They had to go out and actually see what is the problem on our campus, right? So they were collecting face-to-face qualitative, semi-structured interviews. They were collecting quantitative surveys. And from that, they were able to then identify a problem and have those discussions with their peers. The pre-planning process assignment then was something where students are really starting to brainstorm, how do we start to attack this, right? What are the obstacles or the challenges that could be involved in this? Agreeing on a solution, I tied in specific course assignments, again, very related to our discipline, creating a program rationale. So the program rationale was let's let stakeholders know what we think the solution is to this. And a lot of students found that it was a program, it was a policy, or things like that. And in creating that program rationale, they really were integrating model and theory to make it evidence-based. In designing and developing that prototype, the assignments that I had connected were really mission goals and objectives. So they have an idea, what's the mission of the program they're going to create? What are the goals? What are those objectives? And then intervention creation. So how are you going to actually solve this, right? And that is behavior change in my field. So if we're talking about mental health and you have a program, what's the actual intervention? As health educators, we're different than doctors. We don't prescribe medicine. We prescribe interventions to help prevent those health issues. So they had to really come up with those. They needed to be evidence-based, theory-based, and how are they actually going to change behavior in a specific time frame that they had. And curriculum development, what type of knowledge are they going to disseminate to participants that come to their program, right? And how are they going to market that? How are they going to actually make it live and authentic and get people there to really help solve this problem? And then refining that solution based on feedback. So in the refinement, they're doing the program, right? There's that implementation within the community. They're doing peer evaluations. They're getting participant evaluations. And then that final reflection is done through a final portfolio of the full planned to implemented process. And as you can see here, all the skills that are developed in each of the PBL processes, such as teamwork, critical thinking, data collection, strategic planning, measurable goals, all of those things in which we, find very needed for our students in the career world, those skills that we're looking for. So that's step one of identifying the problem. So the needs assessment, the pre-planning process. So those key questions I had the students explore in this phase was, what is your target population? What's the priority population, right? What are the specific community needs? So had them look and dive back into the data they collected. What does this community look like? What is the research context? What resources are available? What gaps are existing for them to really start to engage in, okay, this may be the problem, but what are those other things that we need to know about this problem? So within this phase, they're really starting to dig deep into kind of those real world health challenges, and they're analyzing that data and trying to really talk about in a group a clear program direction. And then from that pre-planning process really helps them identify a well-structured problem to then guide the entire project for the semester. Then they want to start to agree on that solution path. So the specific assignments, like I said, that program rationale is really something to help justify their solution, in which most of the students this semester did a health promotion program that they felt would be the best solution. And in doing that, they had to conduct research, evaluate existing literature, and present really a persuasive case for why this program, one, is going to be important, but one, it would be a solution, or two, why it would be a solution to this problem or health issue that they've associated or they found. So they were looking at, why is it even needed? What evidence supports the need for this program? How is it going to benefit the priority population? And in this phase, I think it really hones in on that idea generation, the critical analysis, students learning to think creatively and practically, while also having to justify and back their ideas with evidence. So also in that step two is where students are using that evidence, right? So not only it's the evidence they've collected, but it's also using theory and planning models from our field to help guide them as a lens for this development of the solution. So here, one group used one of our program planning models known as MAP-IT, and they had to really take that model and integrate it into how they're going to plan. And doing that, really, it's ensuring that their solution is going to be evidence-based, but also teaches them how to professionally present, how their framework is going to guide them throughout this process of planning and their grand implementation. And also, improving the health of individuals. When they're creating an intervention, there has to be some evidence-based theory behind how that intervention is actually going to be successful. It's not just an idea that they come up with and they think it's going to work, right? They have to really Occam's razor down that idea and get to the nitty-gritty of how it's going to be successful. So here in step three, we have designing kind of and developing that prototype or the design. And this is really where we're looking at those mission statement, the goals, objectives for their health interventions. What is the program going to do? What's the priority? How are you going to tailor it to the priority population? And you'll see here some of the students' vision, their values, really important for them to think about, those SMART goals for the objectives. How are they connected? Or objectives, how are they connected to the goals? How is that connected to your total mission statement? But also at the top here is a student's example of their health interventions and how they made those evidence-based, what the objective was of the health intervention, what they hoped the outcome would be, the method they were going to display it, the theory and construct, what is the intervention strategy, and the possible activities that they could do within their program to target that problem. So here we see that students really are addressing what are the root causes of the issue, right? Which then they need to take into consideration multiple things such as the social, the environmental, behavioral factors contributing to the problem. So it's not just, this is the issue, here's maybe a cause, but really diving into those other aspects of it. What strategies, methods are going to be a best way for them to address it, which is really the framework that they're looking at, what's the best health intervention that we can do, and also looking at, has it been done before? Has it been successful? And they did that through kind of literature review. Also, barriers, right? Having our students think about, yes, here's your solution or your path to a solution, but what might prevent people from wanting to actually come to the program or be a part of the solution? How do you engage them, right? So there was a lot of marketing and a lot of conversation about what needs to be at the program to get people to want to come, right? What resources then, human, financial, time, are needed to implement the intervention. So students had to think about their resources on campus, their stakeholders, and who they could reach out to for potentially items to give away or knowledge pamphlets, those types of things. And it gave them more of a community sense too, because they're reaching out to stakeholders on campus or off campus and having discussions about this grand problem that they're trying to solve. Now, in designing that, like I said, the marketing aspect of it, how are they going to get people there? So students did apply marketing principles, and marketing principles is part of our cognate in our major of wellness management, because we do understand that we have students that may want to open their own fitness facility, those types of things. So we've integrated things such as economics, marketing, management. All of these are very important skills for our health educators to know, because of course, if they're going out and they're planning and implementing and evaluating programs, these are skills that are important. So they were creating marketing videos along with flyers. And as you can see here, they marketed in several ways around campus for their solution. So this group was a mental timeout program. They were focused on, as you can see here, aiming to educate student athletes on anxiety by providing them coping mechanisms. So they had calm down kits that they were giving out, questions, prizes to educate, student athletes particularly. And this was posted on our events page, also on Laker Life. They also put it on the TVs around campus. So they had to use professional skills in that regard to get this out on campus as well and in the community. So in addition to them planning and designing for this grand problem, they have to also have the skills to get it out there. So they're encouraged to be creative. As you can see here, their logo, a soccer player under the cloud, and they're encouraged to use those behavior change theories to really target their audience and thinking about, if this is our priority population, what do we need to have in the solution that's going to encourage them to participate? So here you'll see some other marketing flyers, and just a warning too, all of the photos and pieces of student work here all are with permission. And here you'll see this semester we had a Love in the Lake event, diving into healthy relationships. It was about intimate partner violence, but they really focused on healthy communication. That was a big thing between relationships. We also had another group that did a cooking class in the residential halls. So they went there and they did cooking with chicken and rice, and I have some photos of that as well, to really target students who may not know how to cook. And when they do go off campus, how can they still cook and be healthy, and where they can go, those types of things. We also had another group that did the Balance Blueprint, which was nutrition and exercise. Their program really was overall well-being, and how it's a vital connection between both exercise and nutrition. And what they did was they wanted to just have a supportive or create a supportive community that encourages healthy habits for students. And they did a lot of different activities, within the fitness centers and also partnering with a series of Thrive on our campus and those types of things. Mental timeout program here as well. Like I said, they had those calm down kits. They also found, of course, when doing this, that yes, they wanted to target student athletes, but they found out kind of in the middle, partly the way through, that this actually is a program that could be open to anybody. So they really tried to make it student athlete oriented, but also they had activities that could be for anybody if they wanted to stop by too. Also, positivity workshop at SUNY Oswego. This was a pet therapy event with Pause CNY. So again, those external partnerships where students were getting stakeholders to come in. So these are just some that have happened, but over the years, I have had students externally go and do events for the Oswego YMCA with little kids. Particularly, this was during COVID. They did a COVID event about how to wear the mask, how to wash their hands. I've had individuals attend and do girls rock programs for the Fulton YMCA. I've had students work with the Oswego BOCES. So we've had a lot of external programs that they found for specific priority populations. So it's really getting them out there and actually doing that learning by doing for the project-based assignments. So that's some of how they market it. They have their flyers, their logos, those types of things. And then refining the solution based on feedback. So of course, they're now in the last step, implementing this. It's active, it's live in the community. They're doing, their solution, which is those health interventions within this program. And students found, this is from one of the groups, this is the Love in the Lake, diving into healthy relationships. They found that they had 100% of their participants were able to identify available campus resources post program. They also were able to distinguish between unhealthy and healthy behaviors based on their red and green flag bingo that they did for healthy relationships. So 80% there. And also they had an 85% program effectiveness rated by their feedback surveys. And this is where the reflection comes in also in refining the solution, because based on their feedback surveys, there was a lot of things that this group thought went really, really well. And there was things as a group that they thought need to be changed to make it more sustainable, but also have it even more highly regarded. Now, this is something where groups are encouraged to continue this as making it sustainable. So with their final portfolio, this is something they pass down and they're able to use again in our next course, which is 470, which is implementation as well. So this is program planning, but I give them the snapshot of how to implement it, a little snapshot in this course, because I would hate to have them plan something and not get to implement it. So, and then in 470, they're doing a more larger based community event where they're going out specifically into the town or the city or a different town or city, and they're doing their implementation. So again, this final portfolio does pass over, and it is meant to be a sustainable, implementation. So you'll see here kind of looking at what those final outcomes are, and they have to do that reflection. So they also receive evaluation checklists, right, with constructive feedback from their program, their solution. And a lot of students do it very differently. Some do interviews, some do quantitative surveys, some want to do the post test design, and they're really looking at how well did they solve the solution? What were things that went well, what didn't go well, what was the process, the outcomes for this. And in their own final portfolio where they're documenting this project-based learning, they're doing their own feedback as well as evaluating their peers in the group on the collaboration, the leadership, and the teamwork that went into the implementation. So here you can see kind of testing that developed solution, right? So in a live or authentic setting, so we have some of the cooking here where they were doing it in the res halls. They were having the students participate, kind of cutting up the chicken, doing those things. They were getting things ready in the kitchen. We have the Love on the Lake group up at the top where they were doing rock painting right from Lake Ontario. They went and they grabbed those flat rocks and they were painting different sayings about healthy relationships. Then we also have our other group, which was mental health awareness, right? They were doing the calm down kits, right? The for student athletes, mental timeout. So we have another group that's painting here for the Love on the Lake group. Here are some other photos. The Paws CNY right in the middle with one of the dogs that was there. There was other dogs. We held it right in, or the students held it right in the gymnasium. And there was also community members that came for that from Central New York, also with the different dogs from Paws CNY. Over here, we had our balanced blueprint. As you can see, they have if you can see, there's like a 5-pound piece of, or actually a 3-pound piece of fat on the table where students could actually hold it and see what that looks like and how nutrition and exercise are integrated. They also gave out free gym memberships to a local gym. We also have this food truck called Wrap and Roll, which is probably one of my favorite implementations. A group member or a student of mine actually was really interested in creating healthy foods, and wanted to, have more events where you could have a healthy food truck. If you're going to, the New York State Fair, there's not a lot of healthy food options. And this student actually took this from this class and put it into fruition, and actually co-owns with a friend Wrap and Roll, which is a healthy alternative. They do wraps, and from this course, you'll see them at the New York State Fair. You'll see them all over upstate New York, really. And Wrap and Roll, Thomas Brancato and his friend, who doesn't go to Oswego, but this is something that he was able to kind of put into fruition based on this project-based learning course. So some really cool things came out of this from students. And also, actually, that's Tom up here in the corner with the Plinko board. This is another healthy nutrition program. As you can see, he was into the nutrition, and it was one where they were doing healthy nuts and different things that they could make their own trail mixes, and it kind of evolved from there. And again, you'll see the students coming into those events. This we did community-based right in the Murano Campus Center. So for us, this is kind of a main walkway where students, are passing by through classes, and the students kind of would grab them, or they'll see what's at the tables and kind of come over. So the communities overall that my students have reached throughout the years, internally on our campus, first-year students, particularly Johnson Hall, Seneca Hall residents, student athletes, faculty and staff, campus rec. We had a bubble ball event last year where we got those big bubble balls that the students go in, and we had a group that did an event with that. So there's some really cool things the students come up with, and they have to be creative, but they also have to find out how to get those resources. So it's really good. We talk about grant writing and how to go about that process as well. So commuters, transfer students, online students, we've had students particularly focus on our online majors and doing remote events for them as well. The Laker Thrive series they've been a part of. Externally, just to name a few, like I said, the New York State Fair, Oswego BOCES, Rural Migrant Ministry, Paws of CNY, Oswego YMCA, Fulton YMCA. We've had some OCO collaborations in the past, just to name a few of the communities we've reached with the students coming up with, we think this is a problem, let's find a solution, let's put it out there in the community. So some strategies that you can do moving forward in your own classes, to kind of incorporate whether it's project-based learning or just those hands-on projects, right? Because again, it can be structured or unstructured, and it can be a project-based learning. So when you think about how can I implement this or integrate it into my classroom, think about any real-world problems you're having your students think about in your discipline. What's relevant to it? How have you been incorporating those into the classroom? How can you have the students think about that? And then focus on how to make that kind of a collaborative assignment or project, right? How can you have students collaborate or have teamwork on maybe solving or thinking about a real world problem, and then implement those feedback loops for continuous improvement with those groups and allow them to learn from their mistakes. You can start small in this. You can start with a small assignment, and then it can, evolve from there. Originally, that's how I did it as well. And I thought after the first semester, I thought, wow, I really should have them actually implement it. Even though we have an implementation class, they're planning this whole thing, and they're learning about it. Let's have them get out and do it, right? So it allows them to kind of fail and grow and learn from their mistakes. And I've seen students' faces light up where they have the aha moment, or they do their pilot testing and they're like, oh, we need to change this, and it's really neat to see, because I tell them it's the real world of a health educator, because some of my biggest failures were me assuming I knew a population, and they really get to see firsthand what that looks like, and it helps prepare them for their future careers. So some challenges to think about, when you are implementing project-based learning, addressing those challenges, thinking about time management, that can be a challenge, unequal participation can always be a challenge in group work. And then, of course, resource limitations. How did I do it? How did I get all these, resources and things? So with time management, I broke that project into small tasks. That's why I integrated it fully into the total course so that each assignment built up to this final problem solution, which was their program or whatever they came up with. And that worked very well for me. So not only are they getting the core curriculum that they need, it's built into this project. So their needs assessment moving forward, all of those assignments are what they generally would learn in this course anyway. I just kind of integrated it into what this project-based learning would be, and it really helped with the time management. Unequal participation always happens. There's always something that happens with, groups. I found using peer evaluations to ensure accountability helps. That's kind of at the end, it's part of their grade. But also at the beginning, I break them into groups and they do activities where they really get to know what works well for each other in their group, who really is kind of that core leader, who's somebody who's going to roll up their sleeves, or who somebody's going to be more quiet but help them in this regard. So they do kind of some strengths-based activities, but they also have to do a contract. And in that contract, they're signing and they're creating it themselves as a group where they're saying, hey, if we have a meeting, everybody has to be there. If not, this is the consequence, right? So they have contracts that they start at the beginning of the semester and they abide by those contracts very well. And I have a copy of them and that's kind of their core moving forward. So I've had really great luck with those contracts and also making sure that students know exactly what their tasks are in each assignment. And sometimes they need a little help with that. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll be the one who's assigning what their task is for an assignment, right? To ensure that everybody has equal weight in that process. Now, resource limitations. So being able to do this part could be difficult. I don't have any funds to do this. I don't have any funds for my department, all of us, as I think probably all of us, right? So being creative in what I have on campus, and also I did dive into my own pocket a little bit. So over the years, I've accumulated lots of random things for these for these programs in my office, and I use them year to year. So those a lot of the resources I may already have or those types of things. But the biggest thing is really encouraging that creativity from the students. So they are in awe to know that if they go to a local place here in Oswego and they ask them for a gift card for their program, that they actually get it. We've had students go to many chain places like Dunkin' Donuts and get gift cards for their programs. We've had students go to our local Green Planet and get Green Planet Grocery and get gift cards. So students become very creative in, okay, if I'm working for a not-for-profit, and I don't have any money and I'm getting paid off a grant, where do I get these resources? So they've really had to, one, community organize and also gain entry into the community by figuring out how are we going to address this challenge? How are we going to pose it to other citizens who maybe can help us in this process? And then they became stakeholders in the program. So it's a great way for them to see how that process works. Assessment and feedback. So how you can assess, use feedback, rubrics, very important for the different phases of the project. Each of the phases, each of the assignments had a specific rubric. And also, like I said, the peer and instructor feedback throughout the process was really important. So not only are they consistently kind of evaluating their peers throughout the semester, they're also getting evaluations from me. And also any feedback or refinement from their priority population when they're doing pilot testing and things like that to see what maybe they need to change for their solution. And then lastly, focusing process over product. It was really important for me to explain to students every year that this is about the process. This is about the planning process for you. And it's also about, coming up with that critical thinking, how to solve this issue, right? And that encouraged more learning and kind of that iteration, as opposed to what is the final product going to look like. They felt way more successful as they went through each kind of phase and step. And then when they were able to implement it and see kind of the final outcome of behavior change and those types of things, it felt really good for them. So that final reflection, really encouraging students to reflect, on their learning, those project outcomes. So having them see kind of what the outcome was of their program and their solution, and reflect on, how maybe that can be sustainable, how they can enhance it. What did they do that maybe they could do better, or things like that. That self-awareness and that reflection is an important process for project-based learning. So some practical project-based learning ideas for different disciplines. I've seen people do documentaries on social issues with students, which is a project-based learning idea for the semester. Software applications, local startups, right? Curating a museum exhibit, creating educational materials or open educational resource materials with your students, podcasting, policy proposal for local government, digital storytelling. These are all different types of project-based learning ideas. The way that we went was just, due to my discipline, it's health promotion. We do a lot of program planning and implementation, so it aligned really well. But whatever discipline you're in, you really could think about, what are those real world problems? How can we have our students think about those? What can they do to kind of create or design something, whether it's a prototype or a program or this, and, how are we going to get them into the community to implement it and see that come to fruition? So those are just some ideas to think about. It doesn't always have to be in the way that I've done it, but it could be structured in a different way as well. So thank you. I want to just open it up to questions, and thank you for listening for this time about my project-based learning in my class. Does anyone have any questions?
I'll ask a quick question if
Yeah.
yeah, thanks. This is really a great presentation. I'm just curious what which level, like freshman versus senior, do you find this most successful? Because I'm thinking like of trying to do something in maybe like an intro class, but I don't know if an intro class is like the best class for that because they're like typically younger versus maybe like a senior class where they're maybe less students, then a bit older, ready, more socialized into being a student. So I'm just kind of curious about that.
That's a great question. So the age group that I do this course in, so 448 is juniors. And it is a pre-rectory internship, so it aligns really well with kind of me talking about what they're going to do for their kind of final capstone. But I do have a colleague who does kind of a small little implementation in our first year 101 course. And it's not to the extent of what I do in this course. It's just an assignment as opposed to, kind of a semester long, which again, like I said, project-based learning can be structured or unstructured, so it could be that way as well. And she finds it very successful with our first year students in 101, which works really well because by the time they get to me, they've had some sort of knowledge of what that looks like. And she does it as a little assignment where they go out into the campus and they're kind of doing some things that way, just for like a little assignment versus kind of a long semester project. So there is ways that it has been successful with first years as well. I find typically when I'm doing something such integrated like this, that my upperclassmen deal with it a little bit better because they show up for their group and build that in. But there's ways that you can really kind of build that in with your first years too. But I personally haven't done it with first years, but I've done it with juniors and seniors. Any other questions?
Will we have access to these slides?
Yes, Michael, I can send this out right after. Yes. Does anyone have any thoughts on maybe how they could implement it in their own courses right now, or any real world problems that they think could work for them or one of their classes?
So So I did teach a research methods class last semester, and they had to create a hypothetical research proposal. And so this was for the sociology department. And I did have some students talk about very like immediately like localized issues. So like one student wanted to talk about gentrification. I think I had a lot of students actually not in the methods class, in another class I was teaching on, talked about pollution and stuff like that. So I am thinking about the stuff, a lot of the material you gave me to think about how I could implement that to make maybe it's a bit more, not like every student thinking of their own project, but thinking of more of like a more cohesive project for the entire class or small groups or something. So yeah, kind of. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And something that I used to do this a couple years when I taught evaluation and research as well.
Mhm.
So our kind of sequence goes program planning, implementation, evaluation. So I would teach 448, which is the planning course, and also evaluation. So when these students implemented into the community, I had my evaluation and research class actually come and do the evaluations. They had to create the measurement instrument and stuff like that. So I did some kind of crossover with the courses. So that was kind of a cool way to kind of integrate the classes. So I've also thought about other ways that I can really, get my other classes involved with the project-based learning that's happening in this other class. So it's been cool to think of it that way.
Very cool.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone so much for coming. I will send those slides out. And actually, John, do you have everybody's email? I have, I think, the SUNY people, but I was just looking at making sure I get it to. Okay, perfect. All right. Well, thank you everyone so much for coming. And if you have any questions, you can always let me know. Um, I'll put my email in the chat if you ever need any questions too. But I'll email you the slides. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.